time of the event, and even though I wasn't familiar with all of them, I very quickly became a big fan. They are really an incredible group of writers, and their range is really interesting, and their perspectives on the topics we're going to talk about is really interesting. So I think we're all in for a treat. So first, I just wanted to say thank you to Christine for having me and for inviting me. I, believe it or not, I'm such a nerd. Like, I love doing this stuff. I'm like, let's prepare. Let's talk about toxic stuff and heal each other. So one thing that I did want to say about Christine is that the reason she won this incredible grant is because she's an incredible writer. And so first of all, I think, you know, all of us are here to uplift Christine and to celebrate this wonderful novel, which we all hope will make its way into the world very soon. But also, like, celebrate the way we do as Latinas, right? Like, everybody brings something. Pot, some beer, somebody brings the rice. We each brought our words, and so I'm really just so pleased to introduce everybody. So the way this is going to work is that I'm going to introduce each of the writers. Then we're going to ask a warm-up question so that so we can give people a chance to come into the room, because there's usually some latecomers. And then after we're done with the warm-up question, we'll get into a sample reading. So I would say just put it on speaker view so you can see each of the writers as they're speaking. When we come back, after everyone's done reading, we're going to come back into the room together, and then we're going to have a moderated conversation. Those of you who are interested in being part of the conversation, please just put all the stuff in the chat. I'm going to keep an eye on it. If you have questions, put them on the chat. If we have enough room, we'll bring them, those questions, into the conversation later. Okay? So hopefully that sounds like a good plan. I'm gonna start by introducing Jossie Ortiz-Bynum. Say hi after I say your name, okay?
Hey everybody, how are you?
Jossie Ortiz-Bynum is a genderqueer Latinx multi-artist that has been writing poetry since their adolescence to mend the negative impact of being raised in a society intrigued by gender roles. A New Yorican poet who writes hand in hand with their vulnerability in a versatile poetic collection of their faith, self-identity, mental health, marriage, and parenthood. With their writing, Jossie hopes to bring awareness to the veracity that queerness is not permissible. So, hi, Jossie, thanks for being here. Lorraine Avila is a Black woman. Well, Lorraine, say hi.
Hey, y'all.
Lorraine is a Black woman with Caribbean roots in the Dominican Republic. Born and raised in the Bronx, don't get it twisted. Her mission is to break free from generational trauma by continuing to rupture the traditions of silence. She is the author of Malcriada and Other Stories. Kimberly Reyes. Hi. Kimberly Reyes is the author of the poetry collection Running to Stand Still and Warning Coloration. And her nonfiction book of essays, Life During Wartime, won the 2018 Michael Rubin Book Award. A second-generation New Yorker, Kimberly was the 2019-2020 Fulbright Fellow studying Irish literature and film at University of College Cork. Very cool. Sonia Alejandra Rodriguez.
Hi everyone.
Sonia is a professor of English at LaGuardia Community College in New York City. She is an immigrant of Juarez, Mexico, and raised in Cicero, Illinois. I probably said that in too much Spanish. Cicero. Her creative work has been published in Huizache, the magazine of Latino literature, Hispanic Dotes, Everyday Fiction, Acentos Review, Long Reads, and Lost Balloon. Yeah, this is great. I got everybody, right? Okay. So we're gonna start our conversation by asking each of the writers to tell us, like, what has been the role of your art, whether that be writing or other types of art, in healing your trauma. So let's start with Christine.
Thanks, Cleyvis. So I came to write this novel because I was interested in exploring how we've been conditioned to accept the bad behavior of men in our lives as normal. And then over the course of writing it, Trump was elected, the Me Too movement was popping off, and then that whole Kavanaugh mess happened. So I was given plenty of great opportunities to like check in with myself and see how I was reacting to each of those events. And what I realized is that each time something happened, I found myself having a visceral reaction sometimes, wondering, sometimes feeling like belittling these other women that are coming out, like, oh, well, it wasn't that bad, belittling the severity of it. And they were sort of knee-jerk reactions. And I was wondering, like, where does that come from, right? I know that I am a survivor of assault too. So how is it possible that me, who considers myself as a feminist, who would characterize myself as somebody who believes women without a doubt, why are these things here still on this sort of cellular level? Why are these thoughts here? And writing this novel has allowed me to explore that, to explore the full nature of unresolved and unacknowledged sexual trauma that young girls sometimes face, and how that can sometimes mutate into something ugly. But like I said earlier, it's also been an act of healing for me, and an act of sisterhood in a way, because I wrote the book to show that we deserve so much more. And it's my hope that if we can recognize that, then maybe we can take steps towards changing our behavior and move towards healing as a community.
Yeah, I think that's a great start. Let's go next to Lorraine. Lorraine, what do you think is the role of art in healing us from trauma?
Yeah, so for me, I think art, specifically writing, has allowed me to like really dig deep into some of the things that I wasn't necessarily allowing myself to be aware of, but also allowing myself to go through this like moment of coming to terms with it before I stepped into like traditional therapy, for example. I think sometimes when we talk about trauma, we talk about therapy, especially in communities of color, as being like the right answer. And sometimes that's such a shock to some of us who like keep a lot of things contained and to ourselves. So writing really allowed me to take the first step in some sort of like self-therapy. Like I was able to like deal with a lot of my trauma through my writing, especially because I wasn't ready to speak it out loud. So yeah, that's the role it's played in my story specifically.
Okay. Jossie?
Yes. Like Lorraine was saying, in sharing, art has been such an incredible factor for me in the healing process. It's been extremely therapeutic. Art for me has been a way to express myself as an individual and voice opinions that I've had, let's say when I was a child, that I was in some cases we're raised to, you're not able to speak up, you have to wait until, spoken to and things like that. And art and writing specifically helped me express myself better, helped me open up more, feel more confident in myself and those things that I want to share.
Okay. Kimberly?
Yeah, I've always had this sort of strange relationship with trauma and writing, and that I feel like whenever something bad has happened to me, I've always had this thought in the back of my head, well, if I could get it on the page correctly, it might be worth it because it might help somebody else in the future. And then, okay, I know why I went through that. And also, you know, it's interesting because those of us big up to therapy who, you know, have talked to therapists about sort of using writing as a means to express ourselves, you know, they're really big on like actually having you write things down, whether it's like write it down or type it, if it's an affirmation or whatever, because there's a power in that, you know, they wouldn't have you do that otherwise. So there is something to beyond even just, you know, artists writing. It's just people in general, you know, when you put something down on paper or on your computer, something happens. There's a magic that happens in that process. And so, you know, that's real.
Yeah, it's very real. Sonia, do you want to come in?
Sure. I echo what everyone's been saying. And I think for me, Sandra Cisneros has this quote somewhere where, and it might be from The House on Mango Street, where she writes, if I put the ghost down on paper, like maybe it won't haunt me as much. And Toni Morrison in Beloved also has this like beautiful quote about like remembering, like re/membering, like to put things together again, like pieces being put back together, like pieces of bodies being put together. And I like to think of art having that possibility, right? If I put it down, maybe it won't hurt as much. That doesn't mean that it won't hurt still, but I like this idea of not as much. And I like Toni Morrison's idea of being in pieces, but having the possibility of remembering, of being able to put yourself back together. And I think that's what art and writing in particular has done for me.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I think all of you, have hit on such a critical aspect of this conundrum, I think, of growing up in communities where we love, you know, so much of our culture, but so much of it is so problematic. And so for me, you know, I know when I was growing up, there was a lot of abuse in my home. I mean, and so we're gonna talk about the thing, right? Like we don't need to hold back. This is a safe space. You know, there was a lot of abuse. Like my mom was married. Our stepfather was, you know, he used to beat my mom a lot. There was, I mean, he was a pedophile, so there was sexual molestation in my home. And I have to be honest with you that even though there was this overwhelming sense of darkness and looming, you know, terror in my home, like it was really surreal, because when I went out into the street, like no one talked about it, no one acknowledged it. Even if my mom had bruises, no one ever said anything about it. And so to me, you know, I had a very similar experience. And it's so interesting that Sonia is talking about Toni Morrison, because when I read The Bluest Eye, I didn't even speak English that well. But I remember reading this book about this little girl being like abused and being like, oh shit, like that's my life. You know, this kind of terror that I lived in and this sense I always had of sadness. And in a way, to me, like that was my first experience with art as a mirror that reflects what's really happening in the world. And I do, you know, I've heard a lot of people, Nikki Giovanni recently said that if, like when Toni Morrison died last year in an interview, she said, if Pecola Breedlove had read more books, you know, and she was talking about Kwame Alexander and like, you know, talking about all these incredible writers that celebrate Blackness, that celebrate difference, that, you know, she would have felt loved, even if the people in her immediate world didn't love her. And so I think a lot about how like art for us as artists is a way through to trauma. And we'll get into this later too, like talking a little bit about the receiving end of art. But to me, like when I started writing nonfiction, and in my fiction it's always been there, but certainly when I started writing nonfiction, I remember being like, I'm gonna put it in the paper. Like I'm gonna confront the ghost. And it's such a powerful experience for most of us. So I think we've given the latecomers enough time. What do you guys think? Yes? Okay, so now we're going to start going through our reading. I'm very excited because you guys are in for such a treat. And so I tried to put people in an order that I think the work is talking to each other, and also, you know, it provides a lot of variety because there's a lot of variety in style. So of course, all of us are here to celebrate Christine and her book and uplift her in sisterhood, hermandad. So Christine, will you please start for us?
Of course, I'm gonna pull it up here. So I'm going to be reading an excerpt from early on in my novel. Just so you know, the two main characters are named Brisma and Kelly, and it's set over 3 different time periods, 1996, 2000, 2001, and 2006. So this scene is from 1996, which will become clear. The latest stray to arrive at Casa Cortez, Louise kept the name after the divorce, was Timothy. Timothy was a senior on winter break at Monsignor McClancy when his parents kicked him out for getting a blowjob from a sophomore girl in their basement. Louise's brother, Pete, worked as a janitor at the school and offered him a room in their house to finish out the year and graduate high school, an extra broom closet that had been converted to fit exactly one twin-size bed and a very slim dresser. Louise took to him right away, I could tell. She saved him the biggest baked potato, served him iced tea first. He was attractive, but as an only child to a single mother, I hadn't been around all that many men in my 11 years of life, so the presence of any really was reason enough for excitement. Timothy had a thick neck that had tanned peach by June and wore scuffed Timberland boots as if he already knew he was destined to work construction. He had curly blonde hair that he kept cropped close in a fade and offset with a sparkling blue stud earring. It was his birthstone, he told us. Virgo, he'd said, like a virgin. Do you know what that means? Kelly and I broke into a rendition of Madonna's song immediately, swinging our neon lycra-clad hips and running our hands through our frizzy hair. He smiled and his healthy pink lips curled at the sides. I would spend hours in the mirror that summer staring at my own purple-hued hips, Herbalife commercials and lead paint contamination PSAs blaring between Ricky Lake segments in the background, wondering if I might be sick or deficient in some kind of vitamin because mine weren't the same color. Sometimes he would sit with us on the back stoop of the house that overlooked a steep fenced-in junkyard between the garage and the commercial bakery outlet that sat below on Queens Boulevard. Through the trees and ripped tires that littered this nearly vertical drop, Kelly and I could just make out when new deliveries arrived, and we'd run around the corner to buy the best of the expired marble loaves and cinnamon buns. He had a harmonica that we thought was stupid. "Who do you think you are, blues traveler?" I asked him once while he played. He flourished the end of his song with what looked like big fat turkey tail hands flapping against the instrument and strained to widen his green eyes. Kelly, her bony, narrow thighs and hips too tiny for her hand-me-down shorts, slid in close to sit next to Timothy and rested her hand on his knee. "Can I try?" He looked at her, and for a second, I could see that he was nervous. He raised a scarred eyebrow at me briefly, but then quickly flashed that strawberry pink gum smile at us both. "No, I don't think so, Kels." He tugged on her right earlobe and brushed her cheek with the back of his hand. "It'd be like we were swapping spit," he emphasized. "Like we were boyfriend and girlfriend, kissing or something." Kelly took her hand off his jeans. "You don't want to kiss me, do you?" We both erupted in nervous laughter, and Kelly screamed gross as she leapt up from the stone steps. She shot out across the concrete yard and swung the broken chain link gate open, and it bounced back on its hinges with a loud whine as she ran into the empty lot next door. I followed closely behind, not wanting to be left alone with Timothy, and found her in the plot of soil we'd dug to be our hideout. The dugout, we'd called it, long before we knew all that much about baseball. On the third straight day of a New York City heat wave that July, Kelly and I retreated to the cool, damp air of her basement to read the latest installment in my fan fiction saga based on the X-Files. Kelly flipped the last page closed, revealing $signs and zeros. The manuscript was printed on the backs of old medical bills from Mommy's job at St. Vincent's. The maintenance men always knew to save a box for her to take home before trashing them. "So hold up." Kelly blew silky strands of black hair from her face. "The chick is Mulder, or—" I snatched it out of her hands. "Never mind," I said, rolling it up and shoving it into my back pocket. No, Kelly said. "I liked it." I tugged at the hem of my shorts, which were already too tight from the beginning of the summer, and sat down. I'd grown several inches taller and fuller than Kelly in the last few months. "Forget it," I said. Kelly humored my fan fiction, especially when I wrote her into it, but couldn't be bothered to watch much television beyond what was on at my house when she came over. "I'm a liver," she'd said, "not a watcher." "You're a bodily organ?" I asked, eliciting a groan. "How you such a nerd sometimes, yo?" Our forearms against the concrete floor in the one furnished room of the basement that her older brother used to make out with girls, we listened to Boyz II Men cassette tapes on his boombox for a while before we decided to explore the dark corners of the cellar. Kelly and I regularly searched for love letters or mixtapes or condom wrappers, anything to piece together the intimate lives we knew the adults around us must have lived. Towards the back of the house, where twin midget doors swung out onto the concrete backyard, a washer and dryer sat underneath lines of rope hung from the exposed wooden beams of the ceiling to dry delicates. That day, we found the silk and cotton boxers that had come out of Timothy's wash hanging on the lines. Ooh la la, Kelly said as she tugged a black pair with red kisses on it down from the clothespin on the line. She held it up in front of her face and made it dance between pinched fingers. I laughed. How the hell he got these kind of boxers, I asked. You think your mom bought them for him? Kelly let the pair drop from her fingers and sucked her teeth. My mom don't buy him shit, she said, looking up at the line for another one. Do you think he's cute? Kelly rolled her eyes as she ripped another silk pair down and threw it on my face. I tore it off and tossed it back at her. That's disgusting. What? She said, cocking her eyebrow. I heard you say you thought he was cute. Did not. I leaned on the clothesline with my right arm and caught myself in the mirror above the sink. I sucked in my stomach and adjusted the tank top over my chest. Mommy had graduated me from sports bras to the polyester sheen of Conway's back wall a few weeks ago for my 11th birthday, and the underwire dug uncomfortably into my ribcage. I asked if you thought he was. Kelly pretended to ignore me and ran her hands along the line of boxers as if she were a rich woman admiring her art collection. Besides, I shrugged, even if I did think he was cute, I don't want to rub my face in his underwear. Kelly sighed, tired of me, I could tell. I got the sense oftentimes that I was too dumb for her or too prudish, too naive for sure. What's the big deal, you baby? She gestured toward the washing machine. It's not like they're dirty. She ripped a cotton pair with a silkscreen print of Porky Pig on the butt and threw it at me, but this time I caught it. She smiled and opened her arms wide, grabbing onto the lines overhead, and ran her face across each pair of shorts, one long motorboat through a sea of his unmentionables. I laughed at her audacity, her brazen disregard for other people's property. I wished I could be more like Kelly. What are you doing? His voice was deep and reverberated against the low ceiling of the cellar, stopping my laughter cold. Timothy stood behind us with an empty laundry basket at his hip. His face was hard. I couldn't quite read if he was mad at us, but there was heat in his eyes, an excited self-awareness of the scene he'd just walked into. I looked at Kelly, but she didn't look scared. She looked amused, defiant, as if she'd been expecting this. Laundry, she shrugged, a blue and orange pair of Mets boxers hanging off her fingertip. He snatched it from her and threw it in the plastic basket at his hip. Just as quickly, he grabbed her wrist in his thick fist and twisted it behind her. Kelly was so short, she only came up to his chest. He pulled her close to him. You want to do my laundry? He asked, his voice low and intimate. It wasn't the same voice he used when he played his harmonica for us on the stoop. Kelly didn't look at me or at him, but at the line of clothes above her. She didn't seem shocked or afraid at all. There was nothing new about the situation. It seemed like a scene she had acted out before. Timothy turned to raise his eyebrows at me. You want to feel my boxers? He dropped the laundry basket onto the concrete floor and the sound echoed throughout the basement. Underneath it, I could hear the metal of his belt buckle coming undone. I gasped and took a step back, my bare heel banging into the empty washing machine behind us. It was like a gong, the sound of its quivering hollow walls echoing through the house and snapping Kelly out of her dim fog. She elbowed Timothy away from her hard. He staggered back, but trained his hungry eyes on me instead. I saw you, he said, his right arm outstretched as he reached for me, the alarm of leather and metal sounding off at his waist. You wanted this too. His fingers barely grazed my neck before I ducked out past him and ran for the far back door. I made it up the warped wooden steps and out into the yard where Louise sat with a freshly lit Virginia Slim. I ran past her and past the broken fence, losing one of my chunky jelly sandals in the process. When I got to the dugout, I hugged my knees at the far edge of the dirt lot, where the tall weeds grew strong and thick from the ground. It wasn't until Kelly followed shortly thereafter, trailed by Louise's coughing wails for us to come back and apologize for being rude to Timothy, that I realized I was still clutching a laundered pair of his underwear. Kelly lay panting flat back on the ground next to me. Has he done that before? She cut her eyes at me. There I was again, so silly, so naive. She propped herself up on one elbow, her eyes still on mine, sizing me up. We practice, she said. Practice what? Shh. She clamped her perpetually wet palm over my mouth. Kissing, she said. We practice kissing. It's like a game. I stared at her, not comprehending what she was saying, even though on some level I had suspected it for some time. But he's almost 18. Kelly lowered herself back onto the ground, and I could feel the wall go back up between us. I was still too dumb, too innocent to ever understand. If we listened then, we could just make out Louise apologizing to Timothy and offering to buy him new clothes. Occasionally, she would shout in our general direction, "Come get your shoe," or "You lost your shoe, dingbat," and she'd laugh, and we'd hear Timothy laugh too. I dug into the cool soil with the bare toes of my non-sandaled foot and imagined myself a worm crawling into the earth. Suddenly, Kelly scrambled to her knees and snatched the boxers that I'd been gripping in my fist. She pawed at the ground like a dog with a bone, and I didn't know what else to do but help her. I wanted to bury this moment and forget it as soon as possible. But Kelly, judging by the crazed look in her eyes, was burying treasure. To her, somehow, this was a prize that she had earned. I helped her, and I clawed so deep that I was cleaning soil out from my fingernails for a week afterward. We lay back down over the fresh earth together. I tried to synchronize my breathing with hers so that our lungs functioned as one beast hiding in the bush. I squeezed her wrist so hard I felt ligaments pressed against the bone beneath her skin. But I tried to still my nerves and match her pulse with mine. If we could share a soul I'd felt, a body, if I could give her mine, we'd survive. We'd make it through. She turned to look at me and shook her head. "You can still smell it," she said, motioning back toward the house with a puckered mouth. Her cigarette. That's it.
Yay! I was going like this, you know. I have a tendency to get really high pitched, so I'm trying to keep myself calm for you guys, for everyone on. Okay, so our second reader is going to be Lorraine Avila. Lorraine, are you here?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna be reading off my phone, so I'm just like looking down. So this is gonna be an excerpt from a short story called Lights Off. Le apagaron la luz a Margarita, the bartender yelled. He had forgotten the poet's name. Remember, it started with an M, in his throat when she had first asked for her drink. Cleyvis wondered what song that line was from as she sipped her Long Island iced tea. The room was spinning a little, and it held no one she knew directly, so she couldn't ask. Her best friend Mercedes had dragged her out of her apartment. 9 months, cuffed up, next to a man that made the stars rise in and out of her, had caused Cleyvis to forget that she had a clan of friends who had always been able to spot the sun in her chest. Mercedes was outside the venue smoking a cigarette, although she had quit them years ago. Today she had wanted one. Just one. After having poured out her heart through poetry to a room full of people that came to hear from her, after convincing herself that she had fucked up again, let another mostly good type of dude win. Cleyvis accompanied her for a few minutes, but the wind was too wild as it penetrated the skin between her thigh-high boots and her short dress. You're a summer baby. Get your ass back in there. I'll be in a minute. Mercedes had laughed at her. And here, take my phone. I don't want to continue scrolling and expecting his call. She's dying. Mercedes is dying. Someone yelled from the door. Call 911. Cleyvis dropped the glass and stormed out, a whole forest fire into the mean cold of New York. The crowd had already started to form around the mind, body, and soul of Mercedes. The blood was already flowing down the pavement, soaking the crack folks usually don't step onto with the fear of hurting their mother's back, dead or alive, hated or loved. Cleyvis burned through the bodies of strangers. Mercedes' impeccable makeup couldn't hide the fear, the slipping of brown into pale. Cleyvis lowered her head towards Mercedes' forehead. 10 years an atheist, she prayed, God, goddesses, universe, whoever's out there, please let me keep my friend. She thought about Mercedes' mother and godmother, who had watched the women drink red wine before heading out, who had warned them of the things going on in the news. Anyone, any race, but mostly men, boys, were hunting more frequently than ever. Cuidado en esa calle. Sometimes safety just be within the four walls you build. The stab wounds were to the sides of her torso and into her stomach. Cleyvis was only a teacher who read stories to kindergarteners, but she knew wounds needed pressure, and so she took her scarf, piled it over her best friend's torso, continued the prayer. Lord, Allah, Vishnu, Mysterios, anyone, please don't do this. We need more of Mercedes. I will do anything, she compromised. This is what, Mercedes coughed, I get for falling, huh? Cleyvis laughed and screamed. How on point was it for Mercedes to question her heart as she lay on the intersection of life and death? Put the fucking phones away. Put them away. Anna, the host of the night above ground level in stilettos that could pierce through concrete jungles, was shouting. She went around the crowd, slapping them out of people's hands in a panic that felt like her heart was about to leap out a gun from her mouth. At the beginning of this particular night, Anna decided she was going to be Uptown's Oprah. She was going to start a movement that elevated women from the Heights, from the Bronx, women who cut their Spanish into swords and stepped on English with their souls. This could serve as evidence, a bystander responded. A video can be helpful, Anna. Cleyvis brought her mouth to Mercedes' ear. Who was it, she whispered. A man, Latino, mustache, 50s, Mercedes fought to say. Taking a few deep breaths, she continued. He kept watching me until he turned the corner, but then he came back. 6 minutes, 360 seconds until the ambulance arrived. Mercedes had managed to get off of her drug of choice, hard, 100 miles per hour, falling, crashing type of love, 18 months, 18 whole months. She had to figure herself out a little, and she went back in with a grounding knowing of self, with the responsibility to take care of her own heart. Mercedes had not opened up herself to a man too far gone. Instead, he was exactly what she had been waiting for. She met Aaron on an app. He was funny. The first day they met, he couldn't contain his silly, and it played with Mercedes' inner child. But like everyone else, he had things going on. On the week they met, he had lost the job he loved, and lost his aunt, the woman who raised him, and his late father's last living relative. When the happenings started piling up, Mercedes thought it could be a bad omen, that maybe she'd have to run, prepare for the exit, enjoy the glimpse of love while she had it, charge the upcoming lesson to the game. But this man was soft, looked at her like there was a piece of redemption in her, made her feel safe by respecting her boundaries. When they weren't together, he didn't know how to shape into her, so he didn't check for her. Often in his absence, he became a hermit, a thing hidden, until he could feel her pull him in. In 10 days, they saw each other 8 times, mostly in dimness of bars, but he always came through with the light. How does a woman opening her heart say no to possibility? And I'll start there. Thank you.
Yay. Thank you, Lorraine. That was lovely. Jossie, will you go next, please?
Yes. I just want to say thank you to the Queen's Council of the Arts and to Christine for this opportunity of offering a platform to share my voice and our voice this evening. So thank you so much for that. The title of I have 3 pieces to share with you guys. The name of the first title is Childhood Memories. Joe, a bastard child, birthed prematurely at 8:14 a.m. on the 15th day of December. Privileged to have had a roof over my head and food in my belly, thanks to my mommy having the ability of stretching pennies into dollars. Him, with his body parts still unsatisfied, claims me for himself. As a reward for the chivalry he presented to mommy and the reward of becoming a father to his newborn child. Eso te pasó por puta, whispered loudly across the room and across their stairs, smudged on unruffled pink Disney princess pajamas. The concept of girlhood and womanhood defiled by guilt in the pages of my coloring book. And I closed my eyes, pretended that the sea was swallowing me into darkness of amnesia. And I exhale. Virgen Maria. He lays me here as confessions under sheets, searching for a place to relieve himself in me. Is this love? He smells of musk and remorse. His sins cover me in secrecy that no one learns of this dirty game. Is this womanhood? The holy sacrament. You two are named puta, and God will forgive me too, yes? Or is he too disappointed by me? I sit with you often, Virgen Maria, while sitting in the safety of my loneliness. Right here in mommy's room lives a monster. I named him Fear, but I pray for him still. That was the, my next piece is called La Señorita Josefina. It talks about us conforming in a sense to ladylikeness and our girlhood. She bathes with perfume water, preferably Florida water, holy in between those days of remorse. She dives into their delusions, drowns in thoughts of her mortality, drowns in their psychology of how a woman is to behave. Ladylike regulations that dwell in the subconscious of how she specifically is to behave. When she is the one in the eye of the storm, the whirlpool of opinions that strip her raw down to her roots. Grounds and grime going down those old rusty drain pipes. A rebirth between body and soul, consciousness and reality. But even so, when the world tries to wash away the molecules of her, somewhere a rose prospered through the concrete. Sorry, I'm scrolling, trying to find my last another piece for you guys. My last piece that I have for you guys is called Colossal. And I talk about the positiveness and the comfort that we find after we heal, and we become more aware of who we are and the beauty of our imperfections and us being individuals. This body, this queer, fat, over-masculine, interminate body, brown, black body, molded through lineages of warrior and blood body. I, Carubén, Falcón, Montañez, Betancourt, Piñero, Acevedo, Rivera, Figueroa, y yo, Ortiz, baptized into inflictions, this body, this capacious, delicate, vulnerable, frightened, large, indefinite, sensitive mass that dissolves so easily through her lover's fingers whenever she kisses my face. These large bones pressed in with cartilage and penny royalty body, I, made of cane sugar, cotton, and bomba, made of Portugal and Nigeria, and consecrated indigenous spirit with Puerto Rico, made of añejo, agongolí, tabaco, y ron. I offer me as an homage, not in dismissal to those past traumas or the current presence of my livelihood, but a libation of consumption for the sacrifices of my ancestors, our ancestors, for we are their wildest of dreams. Thank you.
I told you guys you were in for a treat. I hope you're not doubting me anymore. Thank you, Jossie. Sonia, will you go next, please?
All right, so the piece that I'm going to read is a flash fiction piece. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, so it's a flash fiction piece called Micheladas. All right, cool. I walk into Miche Viche, a ceviche and michelada spot in Condesa in Mexico City to wait for my friend Helena and her sister Delphine. I've been in Mexico City for 4 days working on my novel, or trying. The hot air is suffocating. I don't wait long before the host sees me. Tres, por favor. I hold up 3 fingers. Uncomfortable, he'll hear my Mexican-American accent and mark me as a fake. He takes me to a table in the center of the restaurant. The people at the tables nearest me speak English, and I wonder if I've been seated in some kind of gringo section. I ask for a michelada de tamarindo. Above me, by the bar, the news is on TV. More information about the mass shooting in a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. The shooter had written a manifesto. More people in the restaurant turn to look at the TV. The bartender, a tall, lanky dude, smiles at us as he fumbles with the remote control and changes the channel. The waiter brings me a michelada and I turn my back on the TV. Helena and Delphine walk into the restaurant and I wave them over. Gotti, Helena squeals and hugs me tight. How's it going? Hey, Delphine smiles and kisses my cheek. Helena and Delphine say something to each other in Greek and Delphine hands Helena a wallet. I sip on my michelada. I feel the cold beer trickle down my throat. A cool breeze sweeps through the restaurant, and the papel picado strung along the ceiling dances with the movement of the wind. How is Castillo de Chapultepec? I ask as Helena and Delphine look over their menus, their faces still flushed from hours of walking around the bosque and the museum. I had asked Helena to join me in Mexico City since she'd never been, and she brought Delphine to keep her company. So much art and so much historical artifacts. Helena shows me her phone to scroll through the pictures. She took portraits of Spanish generals, artifacts, and paintings of indigenous people. Nice, I say, and I bring the mug to my mouth. I haven't been yet. Being in Mexico City makes me feel like I belong and don't belong. Here, I'm not Mexican enough. In the US, I'm too Mexican. I pull out my phone and check Twitter. I see more news about El Paso shooting. 22 dead, 24 injured. Is it a hate crime? Shooter wanted to kill Mexicans. I chew on my nail, my left middle finger, my go-to lately. I gulp more michelada. The sourness of the tamarindo lands on the inside of my cheeks and I shake my head to make the pinching stop. The food arrives and I ask for another michelada. Helena and Delphine ordered ceviche. I get a quesadilla de camarón. Our table is quiet and we start to eat. The TV has been completely turned off and Maná plays on the speakers. I see a table on the back grab their beer bottles as microphones and sing, Me vale, 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 me vale todo. A woman with long wavy hair catches me staring at her. I polite smile. I don't want to give a fuck either. You okay? Delphine asks. I nod and point to the beer. Yeah, the tamarindo got me. I half lie. Bathroom. I point and make my way to the back. The bathroom is at the end of an impossibly tiny hallway. I shuffle in sideways, my gut and my ass rubbing against the walls. In the bathroom, I dab cold water on my face. The beer is getting to me. I definitely make it. I'm resourceful. Helena laughs and sits up straight. There's a fresh michelada at my place at the table. I don't know about that. Delphine laughs and sips on her michelada. You'd stay behind, trying to help someone, and that's the last we heard of Helena. What are y'all talking about? I scoot in and grab a cup of water near me. Which one of us would die first in a dystopian movie? And my sister here doesn't think I'll make it. Helena turns to her sister. I laugh louder than I mean to and cover my mouth. Yeah, I mean, I'll try to save you, but also know when it's time to go. Everyone for themselves. Delphine raises her glass. Cheers. So I guess that leaves me to die first. I chuckle. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't have the upper body strength for it. I lick some of the tamarindo pulp from the rim of my mug. Aw, Helena rubs my back. I'll get the next round. I rest my head on Helena's shoulder for a second. It'll be okay. I probably lived longer than I should have. Audiences would be like, we're surprised she made it this far. I mean, it'll be sad. Think Rue and the Hunger Games. Sad. And they'd be like, aw, not Karina, anyone but Karina. And the survivors will avenge me. I'll fight for your honor. Delphine raises her glass in my direction. Then how would you die, I guess, in this dystopian Hunger Games scenario? Helena asks me and then turns to my sister. I'm struck in the chest by the fear of dying, right now, in this bar. I drink more of my tamarindo michelada. I'd probably just die from all the fucking running they're doing in those Hunger Games. My body would be like, nope, pass, dead. I say. They burst out laughing. I join in. A knot forms in my throat. When the waiter brings us our check, I ask for more water. Helena and Delphine talk about where to go next. I check my phone again. A key 47, white supremacist, alleged. Provecho, I say to the people still eating as we make our way out. We walk toward el metro. I hug myself because despite the heavy beer blanket I wear, I still feel the cold. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, definitely last but not least, Kimberly, will you read for us, please?
Yes. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, Christine. I can't wait for the book. And thank you to the Queen's Council of the Arts. I've got 2 poems that I'm going to read for you that play with perspective and narration. And the first one is called Ascension. The machines crushed her, breasts cold, silent. There's no cancer in the family. She's arguing in a death box. Check only one. Latino, not Black. Black, not Hispanic. You're floating. Your trauma glows in the dark. Inside you, there are blips and irregularities, a cluster of malformed cells, a mass of stress, lumps of hard reality that need further look, hate stored in cavities only radiologists see. It escalated quickly, lying on her back in abstract consent. Yes or no, let's go, check the box. Mammograms aren't always clear. They need to take this part out. For the first time in years, you feel sober tears streaming, a cotton pillow that's frizzing your hair. You can't lose your hair. You hope this isn't what the test reasons. You memorize the stucco on the ceiling, keep from blinking. For the first time you can remember, you identify a feeling. You'll feel a bit of cold and wet. The painkillers tighten her, crystalline skin. What is addiction if not cell destruction? What is low-grade mania? You can feel relief rising, your tingling arm, the needle for pilfering, assenting palms, engorging pores, a pinch, then pressure. Is this pleasure? The exhaustion is sating, forestalling a strident stint, waiting, swallow. Her mother already disappointed with the news of medication, a past extracted, a return to the nerve pills her aunts and uncles never took. The separation complete, you must hold the area, place pressure. This new hollow over your heart, it's numb, you can't fear the beat. You're soaking the pillow, the doctor holds your hand. And this next one is called The Body. You keep reading about this woman you don't know. Maybe you knew, back in J school. It was J school, so really, details you should remember. This woman disappeared. People, some you know, are memorializing and celebrating her work. They say she was smart, fearless, always smiling. Divers found her head today, and suddenly you realize you didn't know it was missing, you didn't know what happened, you scrolled but. Stopped to read a funny post about Project Runway. Thought about Heidi Klum, how her nickname was The Body. You always thought that was weird. Heidi Klum sold makeup too, which required a face, or at very least a smile, to attach to the body. The name of the woman you don't know is Kim, was Kim. You should have remembered another Kim in your cohort, but she's not familiar. Not even when you see her headshot in the email for the memorial at your school. There have been a few. She was maybe your age, but strawberry blonde, and when she took the photo, maybe there was a fan in the room where she just turned her head for the flash at exactly the right time, which is hard to do, because she was engulfed strands of orbiting amber flames, crystallized aglow. You remember Madonna's hair floated the same way in the Live to Tell video. There was a Project Runway contestant, Stella, who'd pronounced leather without the R, which you didn't pick up at first because you're from New York, but then you saw how it was funny. It became a joke. How people can be funny without even trying, if being funny just means people are laughing at you. You'd watch Project Runway in bed with this man with blue and red snake tattoos who also secretly loved Tim Gunn and Stella. He had a thick Boston accent that tickled as you both slowly coo, "leather," back at the screen. Once, through vodka breath, he told you the only reason you were in his bed, your body. He could take or leave your smile. Snakeskin is leather. Turns out turning out cattle isn't the only way. Could be any hide. Snakeskin can be expensive, tends to cost more when there's an ornamental head attached to the skin of what used to be a complete body. It took probably a month, more than months, from what you could tell, from what people you vaguely knew were saying. Curated clicks, round yellow faces, a single tear. More than a month to figure out if it was an accident. You were just skimming, supposed maybe she fell off the boat. For a while, you thought it could have been negligence. She could have been drinking, partying, smiling on the boat when something bad happened. No one's fault. Make it work is what Tim Gunn would snap at contestants and why he's your hero. Feel like some of us try. Turns out Kim was reporting about a man on his boat, the way you learned in J school, studying a man in his natural habitat. One of the news stories you finally ingested said this man had mad fantasies about women's heads, mutilated torsos, burnt bodies. Kim was probably killed by this man she probably didn't know before she got on a submarine. A sub, not the dreamboat you'd envisioned. And you don't know what happened. You scrolled, but didn't know the story at all. Thank you.
That was terrific. Well, thank you to all of you for sharing such powerful words. So this is the part we're gonna do the moderated part now. So I'm gonna be asking questions and asking the writers to talk to us and engage with us in a conversation. So, we really want, I know it's hard, we all know it's hard to do this in Zoom, but we want you as an audience to be as actively involved. I love all the commentary I'm seeing because I'm like, yes, I love it. That's how I feel. So we're gonna ask questions, and if you guys want to ask questions too, you put them in and I'll get them into the conversation if we have time. We have about 30 minutes to go, so we'll see how we do. So our first question for the panel is, how do you see yourself being a change agent? And how do you think your identity informs that? And I'm gonna ask Sonia to start.
I think so much of how I see myself as a change agent has a lot to do with like my intersectional identities and the public spaces that I inhabit, or the public spaces where I take up space, right? I'm an educator in the CUNY system. And so I think one of the ways that I feel as an agent of change is by showing up to the classroom every day, even if it's Zoom classroom. I think the way that I curate my syllabi, right, who I include, and I am very determined and very purposeful that what is on my syllabi, or just what I read as a person, is always just Black, Indigenous, people of color. I don't feel burdened by needing to include white people on my syllabi or to read white people and what little spare time I have. I'm sure there's a lot of talent there, but there's also just a lot of like talent and that gets ignored, right? Created by people of color. And so I think that's one of the ways that I do that. With my writing, I try to be very intentional in terms of always being as vulnerable as I can, right? And so I try to use, I write a lot of fiction based from real life. And I think part of that reason is that I still haven't figured out how to say like the truth, or how to speak to my trauma in a creative nonfiction way. And I feel most empowered doing it through fiction. And so I do it in that way. And so there's the story that I read, the Michelada story that I read. I was in Mexico City when the massacre had happened, and I was there supposedly trying to write something, and it was such a weird position to be in Mexico and not feeling like Mexican enough, and like Mexicans being killed in Mexico just for being Mexican or looking, right, whatever Mexican means. And so I didn't know how to work through that trauma. And so I'm hoping that the story, right, whether folks read it or not, it's out in the world, will create or snowball, right, some change. And so I'm hoping that I could do that through education and through my writing.
I think it's so interesting, especially for those of us who are teaching. I teach also at a graduate program, and I do find that putting the work and exposing people to work that is like shining a spotlight on like all these kind of injustices, and just like that curation, I think, is key. So you know, I get what you're saying about trying to show up in each part of your life. Jossie, will you tell us how you see yourself as a change agent, and how you think your identity informs that?
I see myself as a change agent through my writing. Wow. Being a queer parent has been this journey for me that has become a focus to me as to why it's important to show my daughter the it's just this top, you know, it's okay, rewind. It was difficult, honestly, to even consider myself an agent of change. It took a long time for me to become comfortable in my own skin, comfortable to be able to express myself. So I guess by writing, I am not only sharing my voice, sharing my story, what I went through, it becomes something that helps others to heal. It shows and indicates that we are not alone. There's others out there that have gone through traumas and situations with us, but art, just through the fact of just through art in itself has you know, been this main factor and player for me. So I guess just in general, being able to say I'm an artist, being able to express myself openly, being able to be who I am, and have such wonderful support, and is how I hope and that I am an agent, you know, through the writing, through sharing my experiences, and hopefully people will become more comfortable as well in sharing those things that occur to them, and they can see that we're not alone, and we can go through, you know, we can get through this.
Can you hear me? You moved me so much. I was like nervous. I couldn't unmute myself. You know, I think a lot of times about this hesitancy that some of us have to like use the word change agent, and Christine and I were talking about that. Christine, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I do want to just respond a little bit to what both Sonia and Jossie were saying. I do think vulnerability is key, right? And it can be hard for us to think of ourselves as agents of change, but I think existing as we are, being artists, putting out the art that we want to make in this world is just by the very nature changing things. I think if we didn't want to change things, we wouldn't be artists. And then just in terms of myself as a change agent, I think my writing is for and in service to the Latinx and BIPOC communities, always, I think. And I think I'm a fighter. Like, I'm a quiet person, but I'm a fighter. I'm a Sagittarius. We're the only ones born with a weapon, or, you know, that would come with a weapon. So, you know, I take that on. You know, I want to interrogate some of these uncomfortable things that don't get talked about in my work. I really want to explore. I've tried to explore the tension specifically in communities of color, where in terms of trauma, where you might want to demand, you might be in a position to want to demand consequences for bad behavior from one of our own. And then there's that tension of not wanting to come forward because you don't want to ruin their life. You don't want to add to what is already stacked against them. That's an interesting, that's like a nuanced, compacted trauma that I think needs to be a conversation. And I know that some of us here have talked about that or written about that. And I'm just hoping to add to that conversation and create change, I hope.
Yeah. I'm going to move on to the next question just for the sake of time. So Kimberly and Lorraine, are you guys itching to answer this one, or are you okay with moving on? Okay. So the next question that we wanted to talk about is a little bit about, in terms of how we feel responsible for both the art that we create and the art that we consume. We want to talk a little bit about how we curate that experience. So Kimberly, can you start?
Sure. I'm not sure I totally understand the question.
So we want to talk about the responsibility, how we approach how we consume art, you know, like the choices we make and what kind of art we bring into our consciousness. And then when we create art, how we're hoping that people receive it. So what you're hoping people will get out of it.
Oh, okay. So I hope that people, so far as consuming art, I feel like we do it all the time, whether we know it or not. I feel like people are sort of, you know, kind of highfalutin about certain things being art and other things not. And I feel like in my work, you know, like I'm talking about Project Runway, I'm talking about Madonna. It's just always there. And I feel like you can make art out of anything. You can produce art out of anything. And so far as what I hope people do after they, oh, okay. So I think this also relates to your first question. I'll meld it into this one answer. What I hope is that through my art, I help people to confront shame in new ways. I feel like I grew up in a house, you know, and a lot of us did, where people swallow their shame or they deal with it in destructive ways. And, you know, people who read my work will say, oh my God, you're so brave for, you know, talking about this or confronting this. And I'm like, how? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like it would be harder for me to swallow it and to not say something because, you know, I'm a Taurus, we've got horns, so those are weapons too. And, you know, I just feel like, you know, I hope that I hope I'm vulnerable enough and tell the story in a complete way enough so that, you know, people understand where I'm coming from with sort of the shame dynamic. And it's like, are you reading what I'm writing? Like, I'm the last one who should feel ashamed about the situation I'm presenting. You know what I mean? Like, this is not, these aren't situations that me and my body created. You know, I walked into the world and it confronted me in this way. And, you know, I'm not going to feel shame about that. And so I feel like I hope people walk away with more courage to feel the same way. And, you know, I feel like I know, and just in my lineage, I feel like a change agent in that way.
Lorraine, what do you think? What kind of choices do you make when it comes to the kind of art that you consume? And then how do you think about what you want people to get out of what you create?
Well, like Sonia, I try my best to, well, not try my best, I am very intentional about reading Black, and for the most part right now, it's just been Black authors, I'm not gonna lie. And like POC, obviously. But like, I'm really intentional about that because I want to kind of, I want to reimagine from that world versus, like, I think even as a child, when, you know, I was being taught, like, when I was like being told to read Judy Blume and like all of these like white women, when I was thinking about what I was going to produce as a child, it was literally stories that replicated whiteness. And so I think that when I do read and consume art, it's very important for me that, like, Black people and brown folks are centered. I've been even trying to watch shows lately. I think it was like, can't think of the show right now, but like even shows that don't even center Black folks anymore, I'm just like, I cannot engage any longer. Like it just doesn't happen. So yeah, I think with my own writing and my own art, I'm really just trying to create spaces in which we are allowed to like be expansive as characters, as people, and really trying to. When I write, I always have like the kids in my family in my mind, because I'm like, they're gonna grow up eventually, and by the time my writing means anything, hopefully they're going to be adults, and so they're going to be engaging with this, and so like that is my hope, that we create enough art that there isn't a gap in a way that there was one for us. And I'm sorry if I'm speaking for everyone, but I just feel like it's as of late that writers of color have really been given like importance, really.
I mean, yeah, it feels like a trend right now because there's so much attention with Black Lives Matter, and I think largely own voices, and we know a lot of what happened at the Hills of American Dirt. There's been this kind of forced reckoning that has been happening in the publishing industry, and so we have seen like an uptick in the purchasing of books and things like that. But it's still really dramatic. I mean, for Quayle, I was writing a blog post earlier this year, and it was really shocking and disappointing when you look across like the data and how little of it remains. So, I've done the same thing. I've been really intentional about what books I buy. I mean, I started doing that a long time ago, because at one point I just realized that like there were certain stories in the mainstream that didn't really reinforce my humanity. And at a certain point, I was just thinking of that as a violence. And at a certain point, I was like, pero ven acá, I'm being so dramatic. Like, is it a violence to like be erased? And then I was like, yeah, there's violence in that. And that's when I became more intentional about putting my money and moving my money in a certain way. So I think Ty wrote a really interesting question in the chat, about, how we heal from trauma, and how, in psychology is dominated mainly by the theories of white men. Where does art come in and fill needs that therapy can't or doesn't? And one thing that I wanted to say, because I do want to open that up to the panel, I think it's a really interesting question. Thank you, Ty. The one thing that I know from my culture, because I studied psychology in undergrad, so, I have a lot of respect for, the philosophy around how we can heal ourselves, But the one thing that I do know from being Dominican is that there are a lot of different ways that our people have healed over time. And just because I come from a family of storytellers, and like the oral tradition of storytellers for me was a way in which I saw the women in my family heal themselves. That's something that I try to do with my children. Like I tell them stories without holding books sometimes, because I think it's really important for them to learn that you can navigate the world with humor or with, different things, and you can combat a bad day by, doing something. And I think that is a way that we heal from trauma. And I'm just really curious about how other folks, because I don't personally feel like it's an one or the other, one against the other. I think that because we're growing up in Western countries, we have this access to information, but I'm just really super curious on how the other folks on the panel feel. Who wants to go? I'll call on you. Oh, Sonia, go.
Such a good student. Let me raise my hand real quick. I responded to Ty's question in the chat because she had asked about specifically about like traditional psychology being plagued or being informed, I call it a plague, being informed by white men, right, and white theorists. And she's right, or they're right, I'm sorry, they're right. Because so much of Western culture in general, right, and this goes back to your point, Cleyvis, about erasure, right? Erasure is a step in genocide, right? And so when you erase people's cultures and try to impose another one, right? Try to impose the way that like psychology, that this is the only way to heal. It's part of like genocide, a symptom of colonialism, right? A lived experience of like imperialism. And so like so much in our communities, right? Still so much of our work and how we understand healing has to do with like decolonizing what we think healing is, right? And I think Lorraine opened with this, right? That like therapy is for some, therapy is not for all of us, right? Because our culture is grounded in healing, right? That it, like if we think back to like how you said, Cleyvis, that like our people are healing, it may not be through therapy, but they're doing it, right? Through art, through music. And so I think those forms of healing also need to be highlighted and embraced as part of like a longer, larger healing process.
I can jump in. Well, I think when I saw that question, what came to my mind right away is like this already exists. Like, you know, these theories that these white men, like, yes, and said that they discovered or invented were already types of healing methods before they decided to name it whatever they wanted to name it. And also, like, we get to have access to that type of healing, which is literally, for me, when I talk about therapy, it's literally talk therapy. And thinking specifically about the ways that men have, specifically white men, have tried to keep us from speaking to each other and keep us from like being in community. They have always given themselves that space to be in community, to talk to each other, to be able to like, you know, expand in that way. So like at this point, I mean, I've been going to therapy since I was 12, because despite being in a really traditional Dominican household, my mom was very like real about not having the resources to like help me. And so I feel very adamant about like, if this is a resource, if talk therapy is a thing, even if it's tied to white men because they claimed it, even if it was never theirs, if that's the way we can come up / heal, like I'm okay with that, personally.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And I do think that we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of taboo in our communities. That it's one of the tentacles of like this structure of silence. I mean, I think a lot of times when we as women are told not to speak up or not to confront the truths of the abuse that we suffer, part of it is, you know, to control, you know, and to keep the abuse ongoing. So I do think that it's really important for us to always think about how we heal, in the context of calling it out for what it is. And I know in my own family, when I started talking about the abuse that I witnessed and that I suffered as a child, there was this sense of like, you know, and somebody else said it earlier, like, shh, don't embarrass us. You know, people already out there think we're like ghetto or whatever it is that people think. And I do think that these are some of the issues that get in the way of us healing and being better, and also confronting for ourselves that sometimes, you know, if we don't have the tools, if you're not a writer, if you don't paint, if you don't create music, if you're not out, you know, with the bochinche, because I know me, talking shit is a way I heal on the regular. So to me, it's like you gotta find a way though. And like if you don't have those ways, you know, especially if you have the means to pay for therapy, like it's proven that it helps. So you know, one thing that I did want to get to, because I think we're very naturally getting to this point in the conversation, is about solidarity. But like, what are the ways in which these systems of oppression keep us as women and as girls as standing together in community? And then how do we overcome it? And that could be maybe the last question for the panel. So I'm going to start with Jossie. Can you start?
Can you repeat the question?
No, that's
no. Oh, shameful.
You weren't paying attention to me. No, I'm kidding. So the question is, you know, in what ways have, like, what are the challenges that get in the way of us being in solidarity as women and girls? Like, what do you see as those challenges? And then how do we overcome them?
Some of the challenges that I've seen in solidarity is not being able to come to let's say agreements, or come to an answer or resolution to certain problems in our society or in our not there for one another. You know, we're raised, everyone for themselves in a sense, in this sort of a structure of, you know, you to take it over there, you stay over there, that's your business, that's your problem, whatever. And we, as we get older, we kind of start secluding ourselves from one another, and we don't. And that's one of the, I think that's one of the reasons why it's important, as not only Latin, but also as women, as you know, as a whole, as a society, to be able to speak up about those things that concern us. Speak up about our issues or whatever the case may be. We won't be able to find a resolution if we remain inside, you know, to ourselves, or remain quiet.
Christine, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think that for me personally, I know that I grew up being taught, however unconsciously, that to base my self-worth squarely on the attention of men. And I think that that goes back as early as the attention of your father, honestly. And I think that that creates a lot of competition as you get older, and fosters a sense of like, there can only be one, or you know, I need to fight for this attention. And I think, as from the perspective of a parent, I think we need to try and be intentional of challenging gender expectations with our kids, and valuing kindness and empathy above all. And then I also wanted to say, I think that this competition and the idea that there can only be one translates to the literary world too. And how there can sometimes feel like there can only be one Latinx writer talking about this or what. And that's bullshit, I hope we all know. And I personally haven't, at some point I internalized some adage that I'm sure some old white guy said, that nobody wants to read a novel on sexual assault, certainly, especially if it's a debut. And I really believed that for a long time. I really internalized that. And it wasn't until embarrassingly recently that I realized that that was rooted in sexism and misogyny. So I think that's another way that we can encourage solidarity, is to tell, like I was saying before, tell the stories that are important to us, be ourselves, take up space, and help out our fellow women too. Help them access opportunities when we have access to them.
Absolutely. Kimberly, you want to come in?
Sure. Christine took the words out of my mouth. I think competition is the major problem. I know for me in particular, I was sort of rewarded for being competitive, and my competitive nature was sort of like, you know, it's good that you're competitive, that you want to be first in your class, and it's good that you're a fighter. And it's like, actually, it's terrible. And it took me like decades to sort of unlearn that behavior. You know, for a lot of reasons, because you're not always going to be number one, and you know, you're not always going to be the favorite. And then like, who are you without that identity? And I learned from the literary world, as Christine was also saying, like, oh my God, like we are like crabs in a barrel, you know, like there's only so many people that can get into Cave Canem, so many people that can get into Canto Mundo. So, and it's like, you know, you're sort of, or, you know, Hedgebrook as female writers, and you're sort of like, I mean, unconsciously taught that like your allies are your like competition, you know, and that's just so destructive. And I feel like I think the only thing that we can do is understand that like literally there's only one us, and there's only one person that can tell our story, and that competition is kind of futile because like, you know, we don't all come from the same place. And to just keep like reminding myself of that, and to know that like, you know, whatever journal that my friend just got published in, they may not want my story, but my story is still valid, you know, and it's going to be told in the way that it's going to be told. And you know what I mean? Like, I can't, that's not the story I was submitting wasn't the story my friend was submitting anyway. So there's like no point in competing with other people, really.
Yeah, well, and I think to that point, I mean, I always think about being subversive to the system. So, you know, I am forever like reading my friends' works and editing them, and like we go for the same prices. Like, and I, you know, this whole idea that like we're not supposed to be helping each other. Like I continue when my friends' books are going up, for submission. I'm like connecting them to people I know that have been through the process, because I'm like, you know what, like they're trying to game us, we game the system. It's not a secret, like there are people that have been sitting through these editorial interviews and they know the questions that are asked. I don't know it, I haven't been, but I can connect to people. And what I find on the other side of this, both within the community of women, but also more broadly as people of color, is that there's so much generosity. And I think that, to me, like that challenge that we face is, I think it's right on. I think it can be dismantled, but we have to be willing to say there's a risk that by helping someone, they get it. And then you have to be like, yeah, because you were better than me. Like at a certain point, you have to be like, it's fine, it'll work out. As long as I keep doing my thing, I'm gonna win too eventually. So to me, like, I just really love that you said that. Lorraine, like, what do you think? What are the challenges that get in our way of solidarity, and how do we overcome?
Yeah, I think it's to the same degree that everyone's saying in terms of, actually, I just think it's whiteness, because honestly, I feel like the way I've been able to develop myself as a writer has been definitely because of community. I don't necessarily feel like I've been in circles where I feel like competition. And I don't know if it's because I definitely do have a very, like, everyone gets to eat, and like that is just like a smoke mirror. The idea that there's not enough space for us is literally not, it's just like a facade. It's like not real. And so yeah, like I've been like blessed to like be in community with you and Sonia, and like feel like, yeah, like we can look at each other's work and like can push each other and propel each other's spaces. I think also a lot of that competition is like that we feel as writers is like inner, as well as like inner like work we have to go through. Because I'm only speaking for myself. I definitely felt like that at the very beginning of like when I was like, okay, I'm gonna really go into this. And then I started thinking about other people and who was better at this than I was, and like who was telling better stories than I was. And it really had to, I really had to get to a point where I'm just like, okay, I'm not seeing the stories I want to see, kind of like that Toni Morrison, like, if you want to see this, I know it's like such a played out quote, but like, if you want to see this book, whatever the quote is, I'm bad with quotes. Sonia, you're better than me at quotes.
You got to write the story you want to see.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think like once I tapped into that, things just didn't feel like a competition anymore. It was just like, I'm going to write what I can. And especially even during this time of quarantine, I know everyone's like, who's writing the next book right now? And whatever. And like, people are tweeting about all these words that they're writing a day. And I'm like, yo, I wrote 5 words and that was a text. And like, that is okay. I think it's just so problematic that we're really trying to use this time to feed into that perspective that there's not enough for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, the biggest risk, I think, with the competition is that everybody ends up sounding the same. Like when they tell us that only one story is valuable, only one voice is doing it the right way, we're like parrots. And I think that goes exactly opposite what makes our stories powerful. It's like individuality and that uniqueness. I want to be sensitive to the time, so I'm going to ask Sonia to answer the question, what stands in the way of what is the challenge that you see standing in our way of solidarity, and how do we overcome it? And then I'm going to turn it over to Christine. And it has been such a lot. I mean, see, everybody thought 90 minutes was a lot, but I was like, we need like
I know, we need so much. Yeah, so I'll just be brief. I completely agree with everyone's been saying. And I think I'll just add what stands in the way within just like our Latinx community, like there's still so much like addressing of like colorism and anti-Blackness that like needs to happen. I think just these last few months, right, like white Latinos have really shown their ass and like have really just shown the Latinidad is canceled. And there's just so much shit that we gotta like figure out within our own community. so that we can make space, right, and support everyone. And I was replying to Kimberly's comment about like capitalism, right? Like this idea of competition is rooted in capitalism. This idea of like productivity during a pandemic is rooted in capitalism, right? And so, I mean, there's so much, I'm already so tired, but we gotta keep going. And just to echo everyone, thank you so much for the space. And this is how that change happens, right? Having these conversations and creating that space. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, that was great.
Thank
Christine.
you guys. I'm definitely that friend that always keeps bringing it back to capitalism. So thank you, Sonia. You're right. And yeah, Cleyvis, this could have gone on for a long time, but I just want to say to wrap it up, thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, Cleyvis. You are amazing and keeping the conversation going. Thank you, Lorraine, Sonia, Kimberly, Jossie. Thank you, Queens Council on the Arts, for making this possible, and to Tim and Jackie, who kept everything on the up and up. And I think that's it. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your night. Bye.
I just like to stay and look at the fan mail. So I'm gonna hang out here. I got 2 little kids waiting for me. Let me hide for a little bit longer.
Yeah, you got to maximize on the time.
Christine, this was wonderful. Thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you. I really
thanks,
appreciate you all bringing work to read and participating in the conversation. It was, better than I could have imagined. So thank you so much.
Wendy, I see you. My friend is calling from the Dominican Republic. Like, yes.
Oh, wow.
International. Okay. I love y'all. Bye.